my soul and stir my desire to work in your, and light in my heart, your zeal grown cold, renew my love, rebuild, and restore my will. Now renew my courage, Lord, it needs restore. My cup is empty, refilling, and replace all with faith so bold, renew, rebuild, restore my soul, and renew my love, rebuild my faith, restore my soul, renew my, rebuild my, restore my soul.
Oh, yes. My Lord, yes, sir.
Once again, we are blessed by the God of heaven, who doeth all things right, and that he has lengthened out those delicate threads of our lives, causing our golden moments to roll on just a little bit further. We're certainly thankful to those of you who are visiting with us this morning. No strangers in the house, just friends whom we have not met. If you will, we want you to turn to the text that was read so wonderfully in your hearing by Brother Bentley. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse number 1. Ecclesiastes in the Hebrew is called Koheleth, meaning the preacher. And of course, we know that these are the writings that God inspired through that wise king by the name of Solomon. Solomon, when he was a young man, when he first ascended the throne of God, God told him he could have anything he desired. And Solomon requested wisdom. He could have asked for riches, but he requested wisdom. He could have asked for power, but Solomon asked for wisdom. No matter what you get in life, the most important and most valuable thing to have is wisdom. The Bible says knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. The more you know and the smarter you think you are in the eyes of God, the unwiser you become. Because knowledge is just knowing facts, but wisdom is the ability to put the facts into action. You've got a whole lot of folks who got a lot of wisdom. They're educated. But when you educate people without Jesus, you just make them smart devils. But Solomon had the wisdom to ask God for wisdom. But Solomon did not always put that wisdom into action. James said to him that knoweth to do good and doeth not, to him it is a sin. Solomon had a whole lot of wisdom. But early on in his life, after he ascended the throne, Solomon began to step away from the very wisdom that he asked God for. Y'all do know that Solomon was like the Hugh Hefner of the Old Testament. I mean, when you go back and look at his mansion, it was worse than the Playboy mansion. Had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Solomon got caught up in what we call the 3 W's: wine, women, and wealth. And you've got to be careful, young men, when it comes to the 3 W's. The 3 W's can get you in trouble. Solomon at his mansion had parties all the time. Solomon drank wine all the time. Solomon had women going in and out of his mansion all the time. Solomon got involved with women who did not know God. And as a result of that, they began to pull Solomon's heart away from the true God. Solomon began to realize as he began to age, as he got older in life, and really that's when wisdom is acquired. It's acquired with age. It's acquired with time. My mother used to always say there are two things you don't get at the same time. You don't get youth and you don't get wisdom. Because the older you become, the wiser you become. Somebody said hindsight is like 20/20 vision. Because when you're young, you're always looking ahead. When you're middle-aged, you're always looking around. But as you get older, you become nostalgic. And you start looking back. And you start appreciating the days of yesteryear. But one thing about yesterday, you can't get it back. Somebody said you can't go back home. That's why you got to appreciate the time that God has given you now. And Solomon, as he began to reflect on all the things he tried to acquire in his youth, in his middle age, he said in the book of Koheleth, in the book of Ecclesiastes, he said it was vexation of spirit. It was like trying to catch the wind in your hand. All those things that gave him pleasure in his youth, he began to realize just how unimportant they were when he got older. And Solomon, before he laid his head or pressed his head on his dying pillow for the last time, he came to the conclusion of life. He began to come up with his own theme for life. He said the whole duty of man is to fear God and keep his commandments. But Solomon did not come to that conclusion until after he had this experimentation in life where he began to enjoy all the pleasures that money could buy. And then Solomon, as he closes out the book of Koheleth, as he closes out Ecclesiastes, as he closes out, if you will, this diary of a preacher, he said, remember now the Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. If I were to tag this sermon, I would probably say Solomon is saying something along these lines. If I could turn back the hands of time. And I'm looking at some folk now who got a few years on you, and perhaps you know this is the theme of a song that Tyrone Davis used to sing, but most of us who've gotten up in years probably wish we could turn back the hands of time. And Solomon perhaps is wishing he could turn back the hands of time. But you cannot go back to the days of yesteryear. And Solomon, the first thing he would tell you to do is remember. And as I said earlier, when you're old, you want to look back. When you're middle-aged, you look around. But when you're young, you look ahead. No wonder Peter perhaps said in Acts chapter 2, in the last days, God pointed out that the young men shall see visions, because young people are always future oriented. They're always looking ahead. But he said the young men shall dream dreams, because they're always looking in the past. They're always looking at the so-called good old days. But Solomon says, remember. Remember when? He says you need to remember now. Remember while you're still able to remember. Remember who? He said, remember thy Creator. Remember the one who shaped you. Remember the one who formed you. Remember the one who fashioned you. The one who created you. The one who birthed you even before your mother birthed you. And then he says, remember when? In the days of thy youth. You need to remember God while you are young enough to do it, but old enough to know better. You better remember God while you are able to obey God. Remember God while you are able to have the cognition of your mind, because if you get old enough, Alzheimer and dementia will begin to set in. And if you don't obey God while you're young, you won't have the ability to obey God when you get older. He says, remember who? Thy creator. Remember when. Remember now. Why should I remember? While the evil days come not. The evil days here means the unpleasant days. Because as you get older, the things that please you when you were younger won't please you when you get older. As you get older, those days will become miserable. Pain will begin to set in. Unhappiness will start to visit you. You'll start saying goodbye to some folk that you'll never see again on this time side of life. See, when we are young, we think our parents are going to live forever. When we are young, we don't have the responsibility of paying for the mortgage. We don't have to worry about paying for the rent. We don't have to worry about paying for the utilities. We can get in our mother and in our father's car and we can drive it and not worry about putting gas in the tank. But if you live long enough, sad days are gonna come. If you live long enough, hurtful days are gonna come. If you live long enough, distress and stressful days are gonna come. Adversity is going to set in. Calamity is going to visit you. That's why you've got to remember the Lord in the days of your youth, while everything looks good, while everything feels good, while everything around you is good. Young people, listen to me. These days are going to be your good old days, and you need to remember the Creator now. Why? Nor the years draw nigh. Because as you get older, things are going to change. As you get older, arthritis is going to visit you. You're not going to be able to be like those young people on yesterday at the trunk or treat, eating candy all night and all day long, not worried about gaining any weight, not worried about it affecting your sugar. Bursitis is going to set in. Rheumatism is going to set in. He says, remember why, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. You won't be able to eat candy like you eat candy now when those years draw nigh. The stuff that gives you pleasure now, it won't give you pleasure then. Oh, you desire the candy, but you won't be able to eat it because maybe you're diabetic. Maybe your sugar will be set on edge. You won't be able to eat those sweet potato pies like you used to eat them. You won't be able to handle that pound cake and that 6-layer chocolate cake. All the things you enjoyed when you were young. As you get older, you may desire them, but you won't have no pleasure in them. You won't be able to do those slam dunks. In your mind, you'll still be able to slam dunk. But in your body, you won't be able to slam dunk. A lot of things you can do now, you won't be able to do then. So Solomon says, remember while you're young. And then secondly, Solomon says we need to reflect. Once you remember, you need to reflect, because your youthful days will give way to the measure of time. And when it gives way to the measure of time, you'll start reflecting. You ever notice, young people, how your parents are always talking about the way things used to be? How they used to have a head full of hair. How they used to have 32 Colgate teeth. How they used to play basketball, how they used to play football, how they used to do this, how they used to do that. All they're doing is reflecting, because as you get older, that's all you can do. He says, reflect. Why? When the keepers of the house shall tremble. Your arms and stuff, your hands start trembling. Parkinson's starts setting in. You ever notice you see some old people, when they get older, they're always trembling? Keep on living, young people. You'll get to the point where you might tremble too. He says, the strong men shall bow themselves. You see, in people now having reconstructive knee surgery because your legs are giving out, your knees are giving out, your shoulders weaken, your body begins to bend. If you were to measure yourself now, you were perhaps 5'11" when you were 18, but when you get in your 60s, you might be 5'10". Because as you get older, you begin to bend. You begin to get shorter. And the grinders cease because they are few. Teeth start falling out. You have to go to the dentist on a regular basis just to keep the few teeth you got. And then he said, those that look out of the window be darkened. As you get older, your vision becomes impaired. I remember the first day my vision started getting impaired, and I started looking at some things and started clearing my eyes, wondering what was going on, because I had not made that transition from realizing that my eyes were not as good as they used to be. And I went to see the doctor, and then the doctor told me I needed glasses. I couldn't believe I needed glasses because I never needed glasses a day in my life. And what the Bible is pointing out here is that the windows are going to be darkened. That 20/20 vision that you used to have, if you live long enough, you'd be like Brother Lofton up here without his reading glasses. He can't read unless he got on his bifocal. Some of us need some trifocals. But as you get older, your vision becomes impaired. And then he says, the doors shall be shut in the street. You begin to feel closed off from the previous generation. You begin to feel shut in. You ever notice how some senior citizens, they go in the home and they never come out all week? Doesn't look like anybody even lives there. Seems like the only time they come out is when they're going to church or when they're going to the doctor. What that means is they begin to feel like they have nothing in common with other people. That's why you have a generational gap in the church. Sometimes the millennials and the baby boomers can't connect because we come from two different generations, but it behooves the baby boomers to try to connect with the millennials, and the millennials need to connect with the baby boomers. We've got to find common ground, or that generation gap will continue to exist. I said we've got three categories in the church. We got the boosters, we got the boomers, and we got the busters. The boosters, that's the senior citizens. And they need to give the boomers and the busters a boost. The senior citizens are the ones who are holding down the fort. You can depend on them. The problem with some of us as senior citizens, we can become so nostalgic, we get caught up in the past that we can't get past the past. But we need to give a boost to the boomers and the busters. And then the boomers, they're always going around booming. They too busy. They too busy sometimes to get involved in the church. They leave it all up to the boosters. They too busy to come to Bible study. They too busy to come to midweek service. They too busy to participate in something like trunk or treat. If it's not directly affecting them, then they stay home.
Yes, sir.
But then the busters, if you're not careful, that's the premillennials and the millennials. If you're not careful, they'll bust up everything. That's why you need the boosters around to give us a boost and the boomers around to keep us booming, or the busters will bust everything up.
Yes, sir.
because the busters don't have time for foolishness. It's difficult for them to sit through a 1-hour service because they live in a world now where they've always known the internet. They've always known the smartphone. They don't know anything about a landline with a long line on it, and you've got to dial it to call somebody. They don't know nothing about that. They don't know nothing about calling the operator and asking for a phone. They don't know nothing about the yellow pages. They don't know nothing about having 3 or 4 channels on the TV and the TV going off at 12 midnight every night. They don't know nothing about that. They've always lived in a time where you've had the internet. They've always lived in a time where you've had smart TVs and smart phones and smart cars, and all that smartphones do is make us dumb. Can't even remember phone numbers. Remember the time when you had to memorize the phone numbers? You had to know your home number. You had to know your friend's number. You had to know your girlfriend number. You had to know your boyfriend number. And if you had 2 or 3 girlfriends or 2 or 3 boyfriends, you sure enough had to do a lot of memory. But the smartphone makes you dumb because you don't have to memorize nothing. Some of us, if we lose a smartphone, we'll be lost. And then these smart TVs do everything for you. And now they got smart cars now, getting to the point where you don't even have to drive the car. Now the car got autopilot, and we'll get to the point where everybody will have cars with autopilot. But the millennials are growing up in a generation that's totally different from the generation we grew up in. And we better learn how to connect with the millennials. Quit trying to make them be what your generation was, and we better understand what's happening in their generation, and we better meet them where they are. He says we need to reflect. When the sound of the grinding is low, you know, you get to the point you can't chew your food like you used to because you got a tooth missing over here and can't afford to go to the dentist to get that one filled. It's too sensitive on this side. Am I talking to anybody in here? And then he says in verse 4 about the C clause, he says, and he shall rise up at the voice of the bird. You ever notice how some senior citizens, they awake early because they can't sleep? Seem like senior citizens get up early in the morning, sleep early, and by the time you wake up, grandmama already up, looking out the window. I mean, the sound of the bird even bothers you. Can't sleep because you can hear the bird chirping outside. Become sensitive to all kinds of sound. But then he said, all the daughters of music shall be brought low. And isn't that paradoxical? The sound of the bird keep you up all night, but you can't, you're hard of hearing, can't even hear the music. Isn't that something? How you can become so sensitive to one thing. And as you get older, some things you can't hear at all. Folk be calling you. And they laughing behind grandma and grandpa back. I done called them 5 times. They can't hear me. And then in verse 5, he says, when they shall be afraid of that which is high. I mean, as you get older and your equilibrium becomes uncertain, just going up the stairs can become a chore. Remember that commercial came out a few decades ago, I fall and I can't get up. That is a great fear for some senior citizens. Keep on living, young people. The time will come when you're in your home by yourself. There are no children around, and if you fall, you literally can't get up, and you don't have anybody to help you up. And so senior citizens, some of them are afraid to go up the slightest stairs because the greatest fear is, I'm going to fall. And Solomon said, and fears shall be in the way. You're afraid to go to the store by yourself because you're afraid somebody's going to rob you. You're afraid to step out on your front porch and get your check out of the mail because you're afraid some gangbanger gonna bang you right there. Senior citizens are living in fear, fear of heights, fear of crime, fear of their health, fear they're going to die alone, fear because their children have forgotten about them and don't come by and check on them like they used to. Fear because now they feel like they've outlived their usefulness and now they have become a burden to their family and they want to go home. They wish they could die because it looks like they are useless and nobody cares about them and nobody's concerned about them, and they're living their life all day long afraid of this, afraid of that, and just wishing they didn't have the fear in them anymore. And he says the almond tree shall flourish. What that means is that afro you used to have when it was dark and lovely, and in the 70s during the Black Power movement, you wore your fro with pride, had that pick with the fist on it, saying like James Brown, I'm black and I'm proud. Y'all remember those days? But as you get older, that fro that was so beautiful and black, if you keep your hair, it turns gray. I mean, look at Brother Adam's fro. At least you still got it. Or what God does, he'll put a hole in your fro. I mean, when I was young playing football, all the little honeys liking me, I thought I'd never get old. Didn't want to go to church because church was boring. When the preacher gonna shut up? I was the last person in the world that somebody thought would be a preacher. Just like some of you young people sitting in church right now, bored to death. Feel like church is a waste of time. Keep on living. The things you don't appreciate now, you're going to appreciate them later. Boy, I was young, strong, virile, playing football, skating all night. Thought I was all that. But if you live long enough, God will bring you down. And look at some of the heads now, bald. Look at me. My wife were to pull out some of my pictures when I was young, and you saw the hair on my, you wouldn't believe it. Of course, Debbie still looks the same. She never ages. But her hair used to go all the way down her back. And I cut my hair, so I guess she thought it was all right to cut hers. But if you live long enough, either you're going to leave your hair or your hair going to leave you. Let me get out of here. And he said the grasshopper shall be a burden. You drag yourself about like a grasshopper at the end of summer, and desire shall fail. Loss of appetite. Sexual desire dissipates. I know some of you young folk don't think your sexual desire will ever leave you. Your desire to eat will keep on living. The things that you find pleasurable now, even if they are pleasurable to you, you might not be able to do them like you used to do them. I go roller skating, and some of the people say, oh, Jerry, you skate so well. No, boy, but back in the day. Because my greatest fear about skating now is I don't want to fall. Falling at my age, it ain't the same when I fell as a young person. I can hop right back up. Now I fall, I feel it for months. And I be wondering, when is it ever going to go away? Because you can't recuperate from things like you used to do. So I don't do all that spinning I used to do. Folks, won't you spin? No, I am not spinning. Won't you do? No, I used to do that. That floor is hard. Because as time goes on, you can't do stuff like you, and you don't have a desire to do it. And then he says, because man goes to his long home, and the mourners go about the street. Death. When you get to a certain age, and you become aware of your finiteness, your mortality. The older you get, the more you begin to realize, I'm not going to be here always. And if you live long enough, I hadn't got there yet, but a lot of folk who are senior citizens, Sister Bechet, bless her heart, she's gone on to glory. Most of you all don't know that she passed away. She's gone on to glory. But you know, when you get to a certain age, and I talk to senior citizens, they look at death as being a friend, not something that they are afraid of, but something they are looking forward to. But as you live and you get in touch with your mortality, you begin to realize one day I'm gonna die. But when I was young, like most of you young people, I never thought I would die. As a matter of fact, I would say things to myself, I ain't gonna die, I'm gonna keep on breathing. First time I went to a funeral, and it was an aunt. I didn't understand what was going on, 8, 9 years old. Because we don't think we're gonna die. Solomon said, remember. If I could just turn back the hands of time. And then he closes out, or ever the silver cord be loose, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. He's talking about his body. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 1, if this earthly house of this tabernacle be dissolved. See, this vessel is gonna break. It's gonna be dissolved. It's gonna go back to the earth from whence it came. You get old enough, you get sick enough, this vessel, this cistern cannot contain your soul and your spirit. And so he says, remember, reflect, because you're going to return. Verse 7, then shall the dust, and that's all we are, dust. All you have right now standing before you is dust talking to dust. And you know, the Lord didn't say we dirt. He said we dust. The dust is the stuff that's left behind after the dirt is gone. As a matter of fact, dust is less than dirt. The dust is the stuff that collects in the corners of your house over time. It's dust. It's worthless. It's invaluable. But when you know the Lord, he can take the dust and he can give it value. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Amen. The Hebrew author says it like this, chapter 9, verse 27. It is appointed unto a man once to die, and after this, the judgment. If I could turn back the hands of time, I think that's what Solomon is saying. But in the latter years of his life, he says, young people, don't do what I did. Don't make the mistakes I made. Don't think you can find happiness in the wine, the women, in the wealth. I've already experimented. Let me give you the conclusion of the whole matter. Here's the secret to life, and it's really not a secret. While you're young, you better fear God. While you're young, you better keep his commandments. While you're young, realize this is the whole duty